A clear case of fraud was with the Small Business Administration, where they were handing out loans, $330 million worth of loans to people under the age of 11. I think the youngest, Kelly, was a 9-month-old who got a $100,000 loan. That's a very precocious baby we're talking about here.
Well, we're tackling the fraud, waste, and abuse in the agency. We've seen, hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud go unprosecuted, so we're taking that on. We have a zero-tolerance policy for fraud, and we continue to crack down on it and make sure people are held accountable.
And you have a lot of that. You found far too much of it. It's a pure fraud. We like to use the words waste and abuse because they sort of sound good, but many of these things are pure fraud. Now, there was a contract that you've heard about where Stacey Abrams got $2 billion just before we took over, and it was a rush to get her the money, and that was environmental, and nobody knows what she was doing. But $2 billion. If you got $2 million, that's a lot. If you got 200,000, that's a lot. But this was $2 billion was given. Lee, do you want to talk about that? And the other one that was even worse?
EPA has now canceled over $22 billion worth of contracts. $2 billion going to this NGO that Stacey Abrams was tied to. They received only $100 in 2023. And then the Biden administration gave them $2 billion. The director of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund saw his former employer get $5 billion. So $20 billion went to just 8 NGOs, and they're all pass-throughs. And then they were giving it to other entities. Many of them were pass-throughs. And what you have is all these extra middlemen, they're taking their cut. And the taxpayer ends up getting screwed. They're losing out on all this hard-earned money. They can't afford to have the federal government waste. The partnership with Doge and Elon Musk has been incredible at EPA.
Something that was just terrible is the contracts that we're finding, the fraudulent contracts that we're finding where millions and millions of dollars and even billions of dollars in some cases were given out. And I think we'll start with that. I'd like to start with Doug Burgum, Secretary of the Interior. He told us about a couple of contracts that we have now found. When he got there, they saw this with Chris and everybody, and they couldn't believe it. Doug, could you just relate what you told us a little while ago?
No, happy to, Mr. President. There's a federal consulting group, which was a group inside of Interior, but it was managing contracts from many different agencies that flowed through here. One of those contracts was to do surveys of individuals, $830 million for surveys. And so part of the question was, hey, could we actually see the surveys? And then the surveys came back, and a survey was like 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with 10 questions that anyone's child in junior high could have put together, or AI could have done for free. $830 million. So that's one that we've stopped, and that contract was going out after you were inaugurated, sir. So it was
so
jumping.
It's a pure fraud.
Yeah,
it's a fraud. But we've had many fraudulent contracts that were caught by the work that Elon and his people are doing, and working with our people. It's been brought to light. The fraud, not just waste and abuse, the fraud has been incredible. You mentioned one, Madam Secretary.
Well, yes, sir. Well, let me just add to that, and thank you. We just had a wonderful cabinet meeting, all aligned on certainly the effort to realign the government. But even at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we've canceled a $300,000 contract educating on food justice for queer and transgender farmers in San Francisco. A similar contract we canceled in New York, again, educating transgender and queer farmers on food justice and food equality. I'm not even sure what that means, but apparently the last administration wanted to put our taxpayer dollars towards that. We canceled a $600,000 contract out of Louisiana that was studying the menstrual cycles of transgender men, a $600,000 contract. We canceled another contract out of a university in the middle of the country that focused on getting more diversity, equity, and inclusion into our pest management industry. Again, these are nonsensical. It makes zero sense to use taxpayer dollars to fund these. I know these are just a few examples of the hundreds and hundreds that we have found.
Well, a clear case of fraud was with the Small Business Administration, where they were handing out loans, $330 million worth of loans to people under the age of 11. I think the youngest, Kelly, was a 9-month-old who got a $100,000 loan. That's a very precocious baby we're talking about here.
Well, we're tackling the fraud, waste, and abuse in the agency. We've seen, hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud go unprosecuted, so we're taking that on. We have a zero tolerance policy for fraud, and we continue to crack down on it and make sure people are held accountable.
It's amazing. And you have a lot of that. You found far too much of it. It's a pure fraud. We like to use the words waste and abuse because they sort of sound good, but many of these things are pure fraud. Now there was a contract that you've heard about where Stacey Abrams got $2 billion just before we took over, and it was a rush to get her the money, and that was environmental, and nobody knows what she was doing. But $2 billion. If you got $2 million, that's a lot. If you got 200,000, that's a lot. But this was $2 billion was given. Lee, do you want to talk about that? And the other one that was even worse?
EPA has now canceled over $22 billion worth of contracts. $2 billion going to this NGO that Stacey Abrams was tied to. They received only $100 in 2023. And then the Biden administration gave them $2 billion. The director of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund saw his former employer get $5 billion. So $20 billion went to just 8 NGOs, and they're all pass-throughs. And then they were giving it to other entities. Many of them were pass-throughs. And what you have is all these extra middlemen, they're taking their cut. And the taxpayer ends up getting screwed. They're losing out on all this hard-earned money. They can't afford to have the federal government waste. The partnership with Doge and Elon Musk has been incredible at EPA. Their team is very talented. We wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And of course, this mandate from President Trump to make sure that we identify every last penny, whether we're saving $50,000, $5 million, or $22 billion. We will not rest until every last penny is saved. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to do this for the American public.
Thank you. Great job you're doing. So we have a lot of that. We're getting down to a point we think probably over the next 2 or 3 months we'll be pretty much satisfied with the people that are working hard and want to be members of the administration and our country, really. And they're doing a lot of good people. We have a lot of great people. We want to keep the good ones, and we want to get rid of the ones that don't exist, and we want to get rid of the ones that do exist but don't work. And we have quite a few of them. Would anybody else like to say something before we take some questions from the press, please? Doug Collins.
Yes, Mr. President, I think one of the things that you've always told me is take care of our veterans, and that's what we're doing at the VA. And one of the things, though, is you also have to know who your employees are. You have to know the very fact who you are. We're 470,000 roughly when we started this, larger than the active duty Army, when you think about that in the perspective. But however, this is an interesting point. When I first got there and we started looking at this, how you take care of people, we didn't have an HR system that could actually give us a rundown on who actually was working where. That we've had to work with that, working with our VA employees who are those liaisons. We've been able to put together an organizational chart which we can start looking at that. But the interesting part about it is about taking care of veterans, and what you've told me to do is how do we get the people in the right places. And I think when we look at this, GAO has told us we were high risk for years. The previous administration put literally tens of billions of dollars and tens of thousand employees over the last 4 years, and we saw our statistics basically stay the same or go down. Backlogs went up. Maybe the question is not money and employees anymore. Maybe it's the organization and how we effectively deliver for the American people. And that's what we're going to do.
Well said.
And one thing I want to add to it, it is not necessarily a very popular thing to do. You're talking about employment, you're talking about people and the lives of people. And yet, I think the American public understands we're trying to save our country and make our country great again. I mean, you could say it, but we're trying to save our country from this extraordinary thing that was happening. What they were doing to our country was just a horrible thing. And I have no idea how it plays out in the public. I guess you see poll numbers that are very good numbers, but I don't know what that means long term. But it's something that has to be done. If we don't do it, we're not going to have much of a country left, so we have to do it. So we're doing things that I think a lot of presidents wouldn't be inclined to do, but we're doing it to really, I don't want to use cliche. I don't want to say we're doing it to make America great again, because I say that on the campaign trail, but there's really no other words that could express it better than that. We're doing it to help our country, and our country was riddled with fat, like no country probably anywhere in the world, and we're getting rid of the fat. And at the same time, we're going to be bringing in millions of very good, high-paying jobs, and we're going to be taking in a lot of money. Our country's going to be very strong. We've been ripped off by every country in the world, friend and foe. We were taken advantage of like nobody's ever seen. And you saw what happened today with Venezuela. We did something with Venezuela, which is long in the making, and it's very substantial. And we'll be announcing cars very shortly, and we already announced steel, as you know, and aluminum. We'll be announcing pharmaceuticals at some point in the not too distant, because we have to have pharmaceuticals. We don't make pharmaceuticals anymore in our country. And if we have problems like wars or anything else, we need steel, we need pharmaceuticals, we need aluminum, we need a lot of these things that we sort of don't make anymore, and yet we're equipped to do it all. So we'll be announcing some of these things in the very near future, not the long future, the very near future. And it'll bring in billions of dollars, billions and billions, and it'll bring in, maybe more importantly, jobs. It'll protect the jobs we have, and it's going to be really, really quite amazing. Chris, did you have something to say?
Yes, Mr. President. I want to say energy is the infrastructure that makes our country run and drives our national security. The Biden administration grew my department, the Department of Energy, by 20%, and expenditure much more than that, all in an effort to reduce the production of energy in the United States and to make energy more expensive. We are stewards of the American taxpayer dollars, right? That's the job of everyone around this table, led by you. We want to reverse that trajectory and care about every dollar an American taxpayer gives us, and are we using it for the benefit of Americans? Let me tell you one thing, huge growth in expenditures, huge growth in employee count. Puerto Rico, an American territory, had its electricity grid destroyed. They had billions of dollars in the Department of Energy to help Puerto Rico, yet they didn't spend that money, because that money would have meant more energy, more jobs, more prosperity in Puerto Rico. They wanted to have them as a poster child of wind and solar. This island should run on wind and solar. That just doesn't work. But they cared about politics more than the American people, and they didn't treat the dollars like they were their dollars. Yeah. This table, the team you have assembled, we're treating the American dollars like they're our dollars.
Thank you. You're doing a great job on energy, by the way. We have things happening with energy that will knock your socks off.